What's next for Bobi Wine?
What's next for Bobi Wine? Trying to stay alive is my most important goal.
Having a discussion today about how young voters on the African continent, certainly not just here in South Africa, on the continent are changing the political landscape. We'll be speaking to Bobi Wine, main opposition of Uganda. He's in studio with us in just a few moments. Let's go ahead and take a look at your headline.
Uganda is the second youngest country in the world with more than 85% under the age of 35. We have a country where more than 85% have never seen another president. Well, I was 4 years when he came in, so I can also claim I've never seen another president. That is how it has been in Uganda. So that pushed me to challenge the guy, and indeed, we challenged him, and the world knows that we defeated General Museveni, although he held on to power by force.
What do you observe about South Africa's democracy?
Wow. Clearly, South Africa is not where it wants to be, but it's definitely where many of us desire to at least reach. You know, here people are voting issues. Back then, we are looking for a vote. We are looking for a voice. We are struggling for our vote to matter. So there are different things. Of course, we know that many people take for granted what they have. If I was in South Africa, I would be super glad. The young people in South Africa sometimes take it for granted that they don't even go out to vote. Young people in Uganda are struggling for the opportunity to vote and to have their voice count. So South Africa, with its challenges, is definitely where many of African countries, and particularly in Uganda, desire to be.
What do you observe?
It is not just a sense that young people in Africa can influence the political landscape. It is a fact that young people can and indeed should influence the political landscape. They have to, because they cannot let the elders today, whose future is already behind them, determine their future. You know, it is unfortunate to see that Africa is largely governed by elderly people making plans for young people. And I think it should be a clarion call all over Africa for young people to get actively involved in the politics of their country, their countries, because they indeed can. Historically in Africa, all the change that has been inspired and achieved has been done in youthful times. Look at the days of Mandela. These were young people, and it's in their youthful times that they made the biggest contribution to Africa. So we must look back in history and get inspired. The young people have everything they need, particularly the young people in South Africa. You cannot claim, you know, not to have reason to get involved in your political landscape. We in Uganda are desiring, if we had what the young people in South Africa had, maybe we would even influence more. So I want on this program to encourage the young people of South Africa and in all other democracies in Africa not to take for granted the opportunity that they have. Well,
what's next for Bobi Wine?
What's next for Bobi Wine? Trying to stay alive is my... Then the rest will be a bonus.
What is your message to South Africans as we form this new administration?
Well, first I want to congratulate them for having gone through an election, whichever way it went. You know, at least in South Africa, the people choose whatever they choose. I hope it works for them. But again, I want to remind them not to take it for granted.
Yeah.
But most importantly, to the young people of South Africa, as they celebrate the Day of the Youth tomorrow, to know that everything is happening today because of the decisions and choices that were made yesterday. Whatever is going to be happening in South Africa and indeed in Africa in the next 10, 20, 30 years depends on what is being done today. What you have not contributed to is not going to happen in your favor. If you don't stand up, nobody's going to see you. And if you don't speak out, nobody is going to hear you. Yeah. So get involved. Finally, not only to South Africans, but to all Africans. Please know that your freedom is not isolated to you. Let us remember the words of Kwame Nkrumah that Africa cannot be free unless all of Africa is free. And the world cannot...
The note that if you... Yeah, what the note that if you have traveled to Kampala, which I have many, many times, what I have seen is the visibility of guns.
Yeah.
All the time. And I want to note that because I think that says something about where you are as a country when you enter a building and there's an AK-47 at the door.
Yeah.
I mean, explain what that is. What kind of state is that?
It's a state of fear. It's a state of deceitfulness. Interestingly, most leaders in Africa, especially our own General Museveni, claims that they brought peace. But the kind of peace where you have to see an AK-47 at every turn is not peace, as we have been told that peace is not just the absence of war, but presence of justice and dignity for everybody. We cannot be at peace when we're not free. So those guns are keeping people oppressed. Those guns are meant to intimidate people. I'm very glad that you mentioned that people in South Africa should take a walk around Africa. They'll learn two things among others. One, that they are Africans. And that will teach them to be friendly to other Africans, especially those that were friendly to them during the struggle against apartheid. And secondly, they will learn not to take for granted what they have because it is not very far away from extinction. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. General Museveni, who rules over our country today, diagnosed the problem in 1986 and said Africa's problem are the leaders that overstay in power. Even Chinua Achebe, a great Nigerian writer, is quoted to have said in the 80s that Africa's problems are not the rivers or lakes or natural resources, but it's all rounding around leadership. And we cannot reinvent the wheel. It is the same answer to the question. We have a challenge that power has corrupted our leaders, that they believe that only them can deliver the promise. And the promise has been altered. Initially, when they came to power, they were promising democracy. They were promising a fundamental change. They were promising the return to the rule of law. They were promising respect for human rights. But today, they are the shadow of their former selves. They don't want to remember who they were when they were our age. So that's why we are taking it upon ourselves to shape up a country and a continent where we shall grow old, where our children will not hold us accountable for folding our hands as the nation and continent goes to the dogs.
You know, in South Africa, what we have, Mr. Sentamo, is a constitution that essentially says that the rights of all are respected. And we protect some of the most vulnerable, but we also protect the LGBTIQ community. It's difficult to speak to a leader of Uganda and not raise that, because to much of the world, Uganda is looked at as the country that has said, we will throw you in prison for being gay. Where do you position yourself in that discussion?
There comes the LGBT question again. I wish all other rights got the same attention as given to that. However, I'll also mention that coming from Uganda and living in Uganda, I hesitate to give so much comment on that because there's a law now, which law, besides making it illegal, goes for anybody that is perceived, so that is perceived to be kind or whatever. So it's important to also mention for me that in Uganda, the LGBT question is not only a social or moral question, but it's also a political issue, effectively used by General Museveni's regime. So you will understand if I don't comment further on that issue.
Yeah. you say that and just we don't necessarily need to go into it if you can't go into it, but you say that it's a political tool. How has it been used?
Well, it was first brought up in 2014 by the regime, and it's brought up again, and it's what General Museveni throws up again, throws around again. If he's not throwing out the foreign agent question, claiming that, oh, the opposition in Uganda is sponsored by foreigners, they say, oh, the opposition in Uganda is sponsored by LGBT, etc., etc. So they hope to frame a law and then find a way of squeezing its opponents in that law. I have, however, mentioned constantly that we are firm believers in human rights for all Ugandans from all walks of life.